So, good morning, everyone. We are here. I welcome you to the Chilean, Iceland, and the ICCI, the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative Pavilion. And we are here today to the lecture about forecast-based financing, a pathway for anticipatory adaptation in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. And I have to welcome our first lecturer, Dr. Vishan Chital. It's everybody's here in the try to okay. Everybody's here testing. Okay, thank you. So we had a little bit of technical issues, and now okay, can we okay. And then I'm happy to introduce our Dr. Visha Chital for the lecture.
Sure. Thank you, Marcela. And can I just confirm am I audible? Okay, great. Thank you. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you Cryosphere Chile and Iceland Pavilion for giving us this opportunity to host the event. So as we all are talking about COP30 being an adaptation COP, I think it is very important to also talk about what are the new ways and new approaches of adaptation. And especially when we talk about that forecast-based financing, or even anticipatory adaptation has been picking up some pace, and it will be important to also understand in what ways we can learn from it. What are the ways in which different countries and different places have been implementing this practice, and also we will be talking a little bit about our work in Himachal Pradesh state in India. So with that, I will just set the context with a presentation. But before that, what kind of outcomes do we expect from this session? So we expect that a shared understanding of how forecast-based financing can improve disaster risk reduction by pioneering anticipatory adaptation is what we are expecting out of this. Also, some sort of knowledge exchange can happen among the practitioners by sharing key challenges and solutions across international best practices of forecast-based financing. Identifying challenges in designing and implementing these mechanisms, because whenever we talk about mountain contexts, they are generally very remote areas, less in resource, and also in terms of accessibility point of view, in terms of disaster preparedness point of view, they are generally they lag behind compared to mainland areas and low-lying areas. So that's why it is important to identify these challenges. And also we will be exploring some tools, methods and policy frameworks to overcome the implementation challenges. So we will have a very enriching panel discussion today. We have Dr. Suchismita Mukhopadhyay from CDRI, we have Ms. Dulari Parmar from UA, and we have Mr. Luca Rizzo from ICS. So we'll get into the panel, but before that I would just like to give a brief context setting presentation so that the topic becomes much more clear, and I will not take a lot of time, but quickly setting the context. So just a little bit information about CEEW, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We are a not-for-profit public policy think tank based in New Delhi, India. And these are our work areas, which range across transformations, quality of life and enablers. And I lead climate resilience team, which falls in enablers pillar. We are a team of 350 plus now, roughly, and we are a 15-year-old organization. So when we talk about, this is a case study from India, just to give you a bit of context. When we talk about extreme weather events, this is the current scenario of extreme weather events in India, which we studied in 2021, where we found that more than 75% districts in India are exposed to either a flood, a drought or a cyclone. And if you particularly look at these patches on the eastern coast with dark grey color, or even on the western coast with black color, which indicates that all these three are occurring together. So throughout the season, there is a flood, there is a drought, and then there is a cyclone. So coastal areas are even much more impacted. If you look at the Himalayan belt, you will see that some of them are flood prone, but nowadays, due to increasing heat, some of them have also become drought prone. So these kind of insights are coming out from that study. When we look at the changes in heavy rainfall days, what we see, so this is from our study on Indian monsoons. What we see is western part of India and especially central Maharashtra, Karnataka, and even Tamil Nadu. These are the states where there has been a excessive increase in the heavy rainfall days. But when we look at the top belt of Himalayan region, we see that there has been a decline in the overall heavy rainfall days, which might lead to many things. Like, of course, water scarcity is one thing, but increase in forest fires, increase in drought situation, increasing overall water scarcity issue. So that's why it is important to understand the overall climatic patterns here. Also, we studied India's heat risk, extreme heat risk, and that is what is coming out of it. If we see the mountain belt, we can very clearly see that there has been a significant increase in the very hot days and also very warm nights as well. So this is all in terms of the climatic insights that are coming from our research on the Indian Himalayan region. But when we talk about say mountain regions, especially anywhere in the world, they more or less share similar kind of challenges because these areas have really high biological diversity and cultural diversity. It is very important to conserve that kind of diversity because we might just lose out on a couple of species if we are not conserving them well, or some traditional practices, some traditional knowledge might just get wiped out if we are not putting efforts. Also, mountains are the hotspots of extreme weather events, and that's why it is also important to build resilience of these kind of ecosystems. Also, what I feel is Hindu Kush Himalaya region, which is Indian, which includes Indian Himalayan region, but also includes many other Asian mountain ecosystems. Similar to that, there are many other mountain ecosystems across the world. So, in case of say Hindu Kush Himalaya, which is also known as the third pole, the transformation is very alarming. Also, we are sitting here in the Cryosphere Pavilion. So ICCI and EC Mode had also published a research on the glacial melt and the rate of glacial melt in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, which is significantly very high compared to the other parts of the world. So in general, in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, the warming is much higher than the global average. That is one of the key aspects. Similar to that, also the rising temperatures, shrinking glaciers and altered precipitation patterns are leading more occurrence of frequently occurring extreme weather events. And if we talk about socioeconomic context, in terms of the socioeconomics, we can see that the communities are going through severe challenges related to livelihoods, related to health risks, and many other things, especially which impacts disproportionately the marginalized groups. So that's why it is important to understand how do we anticipate all of these risks and how do we build our adaptation based on that. Now, many of you might be aware of anticipatory adaptation, but just to give you a brief context here, anticipatory adaptation is particularly important because it takes place before the impacts of climate change are observed. So if you are planning for certain adaptation actions in your local adaptation plan, in your state level adaptation or province level adaptation or even at national level, how do you anticipate the impacts in advance? So a little bit of forecasting, foresight also comes into that. And then how do you foresee that the solution that you are developing is suitable for that kind of situation? So a little bit of vision exercise goes in there, and that's why it is also known as proactive adaptation. Unlike disaster response, which is after the occurrence of a disaster, anticipatory adaptation is really thinking much more before occurrence of that, and it can be implemented very much before the peak of the hazard is reached. It uses forecast, climate models, and as I said, risk scenarios. So I think some of you might be already much more aware about, say, global circulation models, regional circulation models, climate change scenarios. But how do you include all of that and develop risk scenarios based on that is the key here, and that is what anticipatory adaptation does. Also, when we link that with forecast based financing, I think which is a key here, because when we talk about forecast based financing, it is a mechanism for releasing humanitarian funding triggered by pre-established threshold. So we don't need to wait until the occurrence of a hazard, but once the certain threshold is already reached or we are anticipating that, then the finance can be already released for taking some action on preparedness and other mechanisms. For forecast based financing, the three key components include pre agreed forecast or impact thresholds, which will define at what threshold the forecast, the finance will be released. So, triggers are developed based on the risk analysis. Say, if we overshoot 1.5 degrees, what will be the likely case in particular state in Himachal Pradesh or particular place in Hindu Kush Himalaya, what is going to be the rate of glacial melt and all of that. So that is all about already forecast analysis of risks. Pre-planned actions. So there are already a set of actions that are defined, like okay, if this goes wrong and that is what you are anticipating, these are the list of actions that you need to take. And also dedicated funds. So because without finance nothing can be implemented on the ground, even if it is preparedness or resilience mechanism. So these are the key functions or key components of forecast based financing. So we are currently doing this exercise in the state of Himachal Pradesh, where we are working with the communities, working with the village level communities to develop forecast based financing mechanisms based on the anticipatory adaptation. So in India there is something called Gram Panchayat, which is a village community, village level committee which takes decisions on how their village should be administered and governed. So in that process we are currently working, as you can see our team is visiting and currently also they are in the field. So they are working with the communities to figure out what is likely to happen if a landslide occurs, how many villages are at risk, how many people are at risk, and if you want to avoid that kind of situation, what are the mechanisms, what are the strategies that need to be developed on the ground, and where the finance will come from. So all of these things they are currently developing very much in close collaboration with the communities. Then taking that knowledge to the state level. So in each of the states in India there is state disaster management authority, which is the nodal body in the state to deal with disasters. So we take all of that knowledge, all of that learning, sit down with the state officials and explain to them that okay, this is what is the situation, this is what has been identified by the community through their traditional knowledge, and this is what we need to do. Also while doing that, we also identify financing mechanisms with them, but also we build their capacity to actually implement this on the ground. So this is what has been the main crux of our work. Some of the challenges that we already see in forecast based financing, which includes institutional and governance related challenges. I think governance challenge is almost everywhere. One department does not talk with another department, and then that goes on, and there are a lot of silos which restrict a lot of this to take pace on the ground. Also lack of policy integration and institutionalization of key adaptation mechanisms, which is also a key challenge, and also complex governance and approval mechanisms, which create bottlenecks for forecast based financing. When we talk about technical and operational challenges, generally there are very short forecast windows, which is also another challenge. Limited capacity of say even local communities, even the state level players to understand and identify the challenges or implement impacts that they are going to see, and weak feedback and learning system. So once things have occurred, like once one disaster has occurred, how can we learn from it? I think that has been also missing from the picture. In terms of financial challenges, inadequate and unsustained financing mechanisms, because also the village will have its own development agenda, development priorities. So how do we bring adaptation, how do we bring resilience in that discussion, and how do we really achieve that action is very important. Misalignment with broader social protection schemes. So there are certain social protection schemes, if we are able to align them to come to this forecast based financing, I think it will lead to avoiding the duplication, etc. And also what we see is equity and inclusion gaps. Some of these processes are less inclusive and which impacts the people on the ground. So what lies ahead? These are the three broad questions of what are potential challenges in implementing and establishing effective forecast based financing frameworks, what opportunities exist to integrate forecast based financing into existing adaptation and disaster management, and what innovations are needed to operationalize this in the complex mountain context. So with that, I will stop here and I would like to welcome our panel to join us. I will introduce them one by one. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Suchismita Mukhopadhyay, who works as a lead specialist for advocacy at the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Suchismita, please join us here. Suchismita drives global and national engagement on strengthening the resilience of critical infrastructure systems to escalating climate and disaster risks. Before joining CDRI, she worked with WWF India as the Associate Director for Climate Change and Energy. Thank you, Suchismita, for joining us. Then I would like to introduce Mr. Luca Rizzo and welcome him to join us here. Luca is a lawyer with a degree in law from PUC Rio, with an academic exchange in social sciences at Sciences Po Paris, and has master's degree in international politics from the Institute of International Relations at PUC Rio, where he wrote his dissertation on financing the Amazonian bioeconomy. Before ICS, he worked for a multinational company in the energy sector at their Rio and Paris offices. He was an associate of the Matheus Fellow Office for more than 7 years, where he advised Brazilian and foreign clients about raising funds in the financial and capital markets. Thank you, Luca, for joining us. Also, I would like to introduce Ms. Dulari Parmar and welcome her to join us here. Ms. Dulari works at the intersection of urban poverty, climate vulnerability, and rights-based advocacy. Trained as an architect and urban designer, she leads participatory climate vulnerability assessments, community-driven adaptation planning, and youth-led climate action in some of Mumbai's most underserved settlements. Her work focuses on strengthening mapping literacy among marginalized communities, enabling them to use special data and community maps as tools. Thank you, Dulari, for joining us. So I would like to begin our panel discussion, and please don't get disappointed with the with the audience here, but there are many audience joining us online, so it will be a very great experience for them as well. So I would just like to open with an opening question of how this COP is going on for you, maybe in a quick 1 or 2 minutes, if you can talk about how it has been for you so far, because I think all of you have been here throughout the first week, and what are the expectations from this COP. So maybe Dulari, with you.
Thanks for that great presentation. I think it's a revision for all of us on anticipatory action. But at COP, I think one of the biggest learnings so far has been the presence of civil societies like us in this space, and also loudness of them, which we don't see in other COPs. So that's very refreshing and very powerful. But beyond that, like, I think we have heard conversations on implementation and moving towards financing developing countries. So that's my expectation, that how can we push for more finance, and beyond finance also ways in which civil society can support at the subnational and national level to implement some of these things. So
thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, this is the COP of implementation, the COP of truth, but I'm joking that it's also the COP of insurance, because I've been in several discussions on insurance. So for the first time, I'm seeing insurance companies in a very represented approach here. We also have Casa dos Seguros, this insurance house, that is a house prepared by the insurance companies to discuss innovation and also finance for adaptation, which is, for me, it's very new in a COP. So I'm happy to involve the insurers, and also to bring them, to call and to have a call, to make a call to them to be a solution for the disasters and adaptation as we discuss here. So also this is also a result of the adaptation finance piece. So I also see several interesting discussions on adaptation. That's why I think the insurers are also here.
Thanks, Luca. So, rightly said, this COP, we are discussing a lot on adaptation. I think that's a very, very, very positive development, because and the focus on implementation. So that basically brings into account the solutions, a lot of work that is already happening. So we are going beyond talking about what must happen to what is happening on ground and how that can be replicated and scaled. So I think a lot of conversations happening in the pavilions, in the blue zone, through the side events is about what already exists, which is a very positive sign. For us, we talk about infrastructure resilience and how that needs to be mainstreamed into all the conversations that are happening on climate change, specifically on the adaptation front. And I think that is picking up also. In the last letter of the COP presidency, infrastructure was mentioned as one of the priorities, which is definitely something that's good for us as an organization, because we talk about mainstreaming disaster resilient infrastructure in the SDGs, in the climate conversation, in the DRR. So for us, and at DRI, we've been able to launch DRI Action Agenda, where we brought together experts from different organizations, countries, etc., to basically try and actually define how disaster resilient infrastructure can be integrated into national adaptation strategies. We wanted to start that conversation. We released that last time. This session itself is very relevant because we did a publication on DRI in mountain regions. We also came out with a publication on heat smart schools. So, and all of these conversations are happening in this space already. So that's very encouraging to see that, you know, organizations are aligned on what they want to sort of discuss here at this COP.
Sure, thanks. So if you can keep your mic with you, so I will start with you then. Thanks for those opening remarks, and I think everybody here also echoes that same feeling that, okay, this is the COP of action, so we should see some action in next 2 to 3 days. So with that, I would like to open up some questions for all of you, especially with you, Sushmita. So how can national, subnational and local institutions coordinate more effectively to mainstream forecast-based financing for DRR?
I think what we've been hearing at the COP and through the discussions, I think it keeps coming up every time, the importance of coordinated approaches. So the coordination needs to happen at the global level, but then also at the national and the subnational level. And I think data plays a very important role here. So how are we really using the data that's available? There was a session at our pavilion last week where we were discussing how it's very important to really think of combining Earth observation and AI to really start predicting what are the impacts and start planning using this risk information that is now available and which can be used very effectively. So I think that kind of coordination is important. The departments need to coordinate on the information that is available with them. Sometimes we are just replicating information that is already there with a certain department. So more conversations across the board to see that what is the information that's already available. There is a lot of information and maps, like there are landslide zonation maps available with several research institutions. How are we using this research to put it into policy and practice? I think that becomes extremely important. The research should not just lie there as a research paper, but that is actually something that is practical, that can be taken up by the policymakers. So that level of engagement. At CDRI, we have the Global Infrastructure Resilience Index, which is a tool, a probabilistic model which helps assess the impact of certain key hazards on critical infrastructure sectors. When we say critical infrastructure sectors, there's power, transport, telecom, social sectors like health and education. So basically this tool helps identify what are the impacts on these critical infrastructure sectors and what are the kind of GDP losses or the losses in terms of economic losses these translate into. So that is a tool, and now in GIRI 2.0 we are trying to basically downscale it to the subnational level. Right now the tool is at the country level, but we are downscaling it down to the subnational level. So tools like these will be extremely important, and also then how do we combine similar tools and you would know about the IVME tool where they are basically working on the adaptation. So there is an opportunity to actually combine and bring some of these tools and methodologies together. Also, I think there's work that we need to do in terms of capacity building with the states. So there's some work that's happening in Himachal where we are pulling in experts to come together and help in rebuilding the roads that have been destroyed from the landslides. And in doing that, we are trying to sort of promote the importance of hybrid approaches, including ecosystem-based approaches, which is extremely important in the mountains because that is a way also to engage the communities. which becomes important even for forecast-based planning. So I think I'll stop here for now.
Great, thanks Sujismita. With that, if I can come to you, Luca, considering the adaptation finance goals and especially in the Baku to Belém roadmap, where do you see forecast-based financing fitting within the broader finance mechanism, especially for mountain regions?
Thank you for the question. Well, first I would like to start just saying that we are moving from local to international discussions on the Baku roadmap Baku to Belém, because in Brazil we had two massive climate disasters in the last 20 years. The first one, it was in a mountain region, the region of Petrópolis, which is a region next to Rio, that around 1,000 people died and more than 40,000 people was displaced as a result of floods. And that was the first shock that we had in terms of climate disaster. And as a result of this impact, our city, the city of Rio, started to plan and to create systems to try to predict and also support the communities and the people living in the mountains. So as a result of this impact, we started our planning on climate disasters. But last year, we had also the second biggest climate disaster in the south of Brazil, which was in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. It was so the famous floods from Rio Grande do Sul. That was also a huge disaster in terms of people and humanitarian losses. But for the first time, we brought this discussion into the financial sector, because we could, for the first time, calculate the financial losses and the vulnerability of the financial and insurance sector in terms of climate disasters. So we had losses of around $20 billion, of which only 6% was insured. So this generated a huge debate in Brazil, and we are now discussing that, how we can equip states and cities and also the financial sector to have resilience criteria and also provide innovation for this type of disasters. So when the Brazilian Ministry of Finance, with the COP presidency, start thinking the roadmap Baku to Belém, adaptation gained a huge importance, because we faced a disaster recently, so we are facing the debate, and the Brazilian government wanted to include adaptation as a core subject in the roadmap Baku to Belém. For those who are not from the climate finance community, it's worth mentioning the roadmap Baku to Belém. It's a report that was mandated by the parties last year in Baku, in which the COP presidencies from Azerbaijan and Brazil will need to present, before the start of this COP, a roadmap of action to reach the $1.5 trillion to developing countries by 2035. So the roadmap presents clear actions and recommendations on how to scale finance. And there's and for each of the 5 priorities, you will have and you will see adaptation finance. So adaptation and nature are transversal themes in the report. And there are several suggestions, including forecast-based finance through parametric insurance, but also technical assistance, as we discuss here, country platforms prioritizing adaptation, and several other instruments that I can discuss after in the second question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks Luca for that insightful intervention. With that, I will come to Dulari. Dulari, you have been working very much at the local community level and especially in big hubs like Mumbai. So what do you think, do you think local knowledge and community mapping can be integrated into forecast-based financing systems to make anticipatory action much more grounded in the local context, and how to do that?
Yeah. A short answer to that would be absolutely yes. We need forecast-based mapping and financing both. But just to begin my intervention, I am from Youth for Unity and Voluntary Action. YUVA is a 41-year-old organization traditionally working on housing and land rights, and now also integrating the climate justice perspective into our work. We start with looking at identifying communities that we work with, because a lot of them are invisible in governance spaces. So I'm talking about informal settlements, and I'm speaking from the vantage point of informal settlements and communities who are completely absent in climate governance, beyond climate governance, even within our development conversations. So how can we talk about communities who are directly impacted by climate change, who are the most vulnerable to climate change impact, but they are at the brunt, they bear the brunt of climate change, but they are at the receiving end in terms of all the risks. And I borrow from the presentation that Vishwas started with, which talked about district level vulnerability assessment, which is an important tool because it's a much more granular data, and taking that scale to a further granular scale, we work at community level climate action planning, which is, we call it CCAP, where the CCAP is basically people driven tool to advocate for climate risks in their community and with the local government. And we work with youth from informal settlements who are often seen in a different way, that they are not interested in climate, they are not interested in governance, they have their own layered issues, which is true, but they are also living this everyday reality of climate change, and they know the best on what can happen in their community level. So the community climate action planning tool enables us to work on climate action at the local level. What we started as is doing a vulnerability assessment at the local level to understand climate and social vulnerabilities, which includes where is flood in the community, or mapping where is heat in the community. Beyond that, how many hospitals or health posts do exist within the community? Are there any Anganwadis or small schools in the community? So we do this by geotagging all of this, and the youth from the community are tech savvy people and they know how to use applications, so they are the ones who tell us that this is the place in the community which floods and is historically flooding because of these reasons. And then we take this all information to the local government to negotiate on how an invisible settlement, a historically invisible settlement, can now talk about climate change, and youth from the community are leading that. And one sort of opening for us on this entire process is that previously we were, in a lot of rights language, that, we have not received this and the government has not, seen us. And there is a lot of angst from the community that we are underserved. But I think through the climate language, what we have been able to do is push it in terms of this is the reality, and these are our alternative solutions that we have thought of as youth from the community. And the language of alternate solutions, and this is what possible, has really opened up a small financing at the local level, which we fought for almost 9 years for stormwater drainage in a community. Now through that climate language and the vulnerability assessment, we were able to access roughly 9,000 USD, which is like 8 lakhs or 10 lakhs from the local government. And it shows that not only just the local government is recognizing this, but also really trying to push for locally led adaptations by actually investing in it. And that is a bigger shift in terms of what we push for climate, in terms of climate action, and where it is needed the most, and who are the people who are talking about it. It's basically the youth from the community. And we as civil society, I think our role is to enable that space and not just build their capacities, but also learn from them of what is possible at the ground level. So I'll stop here and come back.
Sure, thanks Dulari for highlighting those points, especially for the communities which are generally invisible in such large settlements. So I'll come to you, Suchismita. CDRI has launched a large program on mountains and has been working in the mountain context for a while now. So how can forecast-based financing complement the ongoing efforts of building resilient infrastructure in the mountain context? If you would like to highlight some examples in say 2 minutes.
So I think it's extremely important. Both are very complementary because what the infrastructure that has been built now has not really been built for the future, most of it. And we are more than 75% of the infrastructure is yet to be built, mostly in the global south, and there lies a great opportunity, because this is when we can actually start integrating the risks and not lock in risks but lock in resilience basically, because whatever infrastructure we are building is for the long term. Forecast-based financing really also helps safeguard the services during, during a disaster. So one is to build my infrastructure right, but for the infrastructure that's already there, and I know that there is an extreme event that is yet to happen, I think this really helps also to maintain the services. So how do you prepare for the emergency response? Are there things that you need to keep ready so that the road network does not get disconnected during the after a landslide? How can you quickly clear that up? How can you inform the communities, evacuate faster? How can you also start, like I mentioned, ecosystem-based approaches earlier, nature-based solutions to actually start stabilizing your roads, better watershed management, and how that is really going to work downstream, because for the mountains what happens upstream impacts downstream. So all of these things are preparatory in advance and preemptive, and infrastructure resilience in itself can really be benefited a lot by the forecast-based financing. And definitely what I said earlier, the infrastructure that we are going to build now needs to be risk informed, so that we are using all of this information, data that's available to build right. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sujismita, for highlighting that. Luca, if I can come to you, and especially in terms of, say, financial instruments, I feel that there has been some sort of innovation in these kind of instruments. But what do you think that what kind of potential lies in these instruments to strengthen forecast-based financing? And if you could like to also highlight some examples or best practices of that.
Of course, just to connect with the discussions on infrastructure, we recently launched a study in which we mapped 20 large infrastructure projects in Brazil. And we identified that about 90% of these projects do not consider resilience and climate disasters conditions. So they are highly vulnerable in case of a disaster happens. And we had in the south of Brazil this example in which our airport was closed for 3 months, so without generating any cash. So imagining the private sector institution that is operating the airport. Of course, they needed to ask a rescue from the government. So at the end, you have a fiscal loss on that, because the government will need to support the private sector institution. But moving from this example to the instruments. So the roadmap Baku to Belém is discussing natural disaster clauses, which are clauses that if a climate disaster happens, the borrower can stop paying interest or the principal. So this is something very easy to apply, and it can be applied to several sectors and several types of borrowers, from small rural producers to cities and to governments. So that's something easy to do, and we can connect that with the forecast-based financing, because we can use the same logic that instead of just suspending the payment, you can also have a grant or additional loan in case of a disaster, so you can help the borrower to set the plan for this type of disaster. So we need to connect these two discussions. In addition to that, one thing that I would like also to mention that the roadmap is discussing is the MDB reform, the Multilateral Development Banks reform, and the roadmap is encouraging the MDBs to have KPIs on adaptation. So for each loan they need to give to developing countries, they need to consider KPIs on adaptation. So how we can also connect these discussions with the type of forecast-based loans, in which a loan should have a component on forecast. So a city, a state that can be affected by a climate disaster can have immediate available funds to redeploy to answer to the disaster. Because one of the problems that we faced in the two disasters that I mentioned is that once the disaster arrives, we need to discuss regulations on how we can develop and deploy, how we can deploy the funds immediately. So there's a huge bureaucracy to allow that, because you need to have an agreement with the state courts, etc., because no one would like to sign a document without a rule. So but we just discussed that once the disaster arrives. So we need to anticipate that, and to connect the MDB's loans with this type of components, it's something that it can be a very easy and can be a low-hanging fruit for this type of instrument. Maybe a final suggestion here, and we mentioned already, I mentioned the country platform concept. Last Saturday, 13 countries plus one region announced that will develop new country platforms. And country platforms are instruments established by governments to matchmake country priorities with the development finance community. And there are some countries from the Caribbean and also African region creating country platforms with adaptation components. So how we can also encourage these countries to incorporate this type of instruments so that the country platforms will matchmake funds from MDBs or vertical climate funds with components on forecast-based financing. So we need to now it's the moment to connect these global discussions with the local solutions.
Thanks, Luca, for highlighting that, and especially talking about the country platforms. I think going forward, if we can really track the investments and really the requirement of financing that can be reflected in the country platforms, that can become like a huge that can create huge opportunity for the countries to showcase that on the tool. Thank you for that. I think with that I would like to come to Dulari, and especially if I can ask you in 3 points, if you can talk about how forecast-based financings, going forward, forecast-based financing mechanisms can be designed to include voices and priorities of the most vulnerable communities.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, and I completely reflect with what Sushmita and Luca said. I think going back to infrastructure, knowing that we have 70% unbuilt, and I'll of course reflect to all of that, but starting with the point that the perception of working with informal settlements is that they are too messy, quote unquote. And it's easier to remove them, evict them, rather than working with them. And it's, of course, we understand there's lots of community dynamics, but any form of action, then anticipatory adaptation or loss and damage action in these communities, when it is implemented, it impacts a large population as opposed to if it was done anywhere in the formal settlements. So that's one thing, that let's move away from the idea of messiness of working with the informal settlements and move towards implementing and working with civil society working in there. Second is, how can we institutionalize all this climate finance, especially for informal settlements, because they are almost 60% of our cities, but completely absent in climate action. So how can we anticipate climate action and finance for them? And last point is moving away from maladaptation. I think a lot of our action in cities are still in the language of development. It's still in the language of push for a lot of development. So of course, we have a lot of infrastructure projects coming into our cities, but in 2021, UR did a study on 4 infrastructure projects that were cutting across Mumbai. And all these 4 infrastructures are leading to 2.5 lakh population displacement from informal settlements. And all these 4 infrastructures, including the bullet train or other Western Freight Corridor, multimodal corridor, all of them are cutting across heavily dense informal settlements. So we're talking about big number of populations displaced from their homes. And how can we then build resilience or talk about adaptation in any way when their human rights are completely impacted? So looking at climate action, finance, anticipatory action from that human rights and climate justice perspective, and moving away from maladaptation and going into action which is, of course, with the community and in partnership with local government.
Sure, thanks Dulari, for highlighting that the adaptation needs to be much more inclusive and also needs to be much more relevant for those whom it is being planned. So with that, we have come to the end of the session, but I would like to just check with the organizers if we have time to take audience questions or if there is immediately the next session. Yeah, okay. So if there are any questions from the audience, please, yeah.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting and like a refresher course on forecast-based financing. My question would be, I think, to all the panelists. I would like to know about best case examples of rolling out forecast-based financing for slow onset hazard, like the droughts. So if there are any good examples that can be relevant to Nepal, I come from Nepal, so that would be very nice to hear. Thank you.
Any of you would like to highlight anything on that?
Well,
Maybe something on the insurance part? Or?
Yes, on the insurance part, there's a Indian good example that was developed by the Rockefeller Foundation with, I forgot the name of the association in India. But the problem there, you can explain better than me, is that you have in the region a huge problem on heat. So, and in that specific region that I don't remember the name, you have also a high, you have some communities that work in the formal market in the street, so basically women, and they need to work in the street to get revenue to support their families and their homes. And the state was seeing an increase of hospitalization as a result of the heat for this type of woman. So there was a massive problem because they were not working, so they could not support their families, and also an increase of healthy costs. So the state, with one insurance company, with the Rockefeller Foundation, created a parametric insurance, so that when a temperature rise a peak, that is not the peak that will harm health, right? Because otherwise you won't have the beneficial part. The insurance will pay for these women to not go work. So they will receive to be at home, safe, and not work. So this was a very interesting example because it provided several benefits. So reducing of healthy costs, reducing of hospitalization of these women, and also these women saw for the first time that they could pay an insurance. So this was not a philanthropic one, but there was a price that was feasible. So that's one case of forecast finance, but in a way of insurance, exactly.
Thanks, Luca. It was with Mahila Housing Trust and Seva. So it is basically a women self-help group at a large scale. But yeah, that product worked pretty well in some cases. But I think, yeah, I mean, just since we are discussing and since he asked also about to highlight the challenges. So one challenge there is the first premium was paid by the philanthropic foundation. So now what happens to the next premium is, so we are also doing some research on that.
How much is like the average cost of premium, if you are to say it INR or USD?
So the premium is not very high. I think it is $10. But even for them to pay $10 just for the heat season is pretty high. So since it was for the first time, I think once there is a bit of competition in the market, maybe private sector might subsidize some of the cost, and really to sustain that product, there might be more of opportunity to bring more people in by reducing the cost.
Probably it could be complemented by blended finance modality, with the government subsidizing it for the, the women groups or that. But interesting, thank you.
Yeah. But also to raise the debate, one problem of this type of parametric insurance is that you need to predefine the index. And sometimes the insurance company will only pay in case of that index happens. And we do have some examples, not in a like with people, but examples on parametric insurance for states or countries in which there was predefined one type of disaster, but the event was another one, and the insurance company refused to pay. So there's a huge debate on that, on how you can predefine something that it's not totally predictable. So it's an interesting debate, and it's an ongoing debate that we should try to set some frameworks for this type of innovation of finance, because this is new, so we are testing, but it's a good moment to discuss the right standards.
Thanks. Maybe one more question? Yeah, David.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel. I think this was super interesting. However well we forecast, however much finance we attract, it won't be enough. but it's important to recognize that there's lots of really good existing good practice within mountain regions. How can we make sure that we're not continually reinventing the wheel? So stuff that's working really well in terms of adaptation when the finance available in the Andes is being shared to the Alps or to the Hindu Kush.
So, okay, there's the static. So sharing of, I'm getting some other channel, just speak. I think it's important to share the best practices. Sharing of the knowledge resources, it's important to bring together experts, no?
No, a little bit down.
Better? Yeah. So to bring together experts, what we do as a coalition is basically to work with the different member countries, pull in experts from these member countries who have different areas of expertise, and then go to the different regions. Say the mountain regions, they have their unique challenges, such as the need for updated codes and standards, the need for more community-led approaches, ecosystem-based approaches, bring together the case studies that are happening across the globe, and then take these experts to the various regions so that they can provide the technical assistance, the capacity building support to the departments, and also try and look at more innovative financial opportunities. So that is something that a coalition like ours are facilitating, and there are several other organizations. There is also the collaborative approach within the organization. So like we have an MOU with ICIMO that's working extensively in the Hindu Kush region. They come with a very strong science and evidence-based approach and capacity building support. So coming together of organizations like these in different regions, I think can really amplify the game quite a bit.
Very good question. Well, first we need to identify this type of instruments as a no size fits all. So we need to have a portfolio of instruments, and each instrument will be better for one specific. So for this type of case, we can see instruments for a regional perspective, and so you can have different instruments that could be beneficial for cities facing the same climate disaster risk exposure, so that you don't just have like contingent finance for cities that are not vulnerable, right? So and we can see in the case of Brazil some regions that it's clear that if a type of event happens, we will have deaths and financial losses. So for this type of cities and regions, it's possible to have that because it's something that it's already announced that will happen. So it makes sense to have these regional funds to protect the cities when the climate disaster happens. But of course, there are some cities that are not exposure. So why granting this type of instruments to these cities? In that case, for this type of cities, perhaps using concessional finance for industry decarbonization will make more sense. So we need to assess the reality of each region and apply the best instrument to that region.
Sure, thanks. So I think we have almost consumed all our time, and thanks for the organizers for giving us some more time. So I think we'll close the panel discussion. I would like to once again thank all the panelists for joining us here and all the audience in person as well as online to join us from various parts of the world to make this panel discussion very successful. As a next step, we might think about coming out with a white paper on this particular topic, and then we would like to represent some of the case studies from various countries together. So we will, of course, get in touch with you regarding that. But I would like to thank you once again, and we close the session. Thank you.